This is Chou-En-Lai, Premier of all China. The occasion, a dinner of state in Peking, in the Great Hall of the People. And the Premier is saying once again what he told the President of the United States earlier this year, that China and America should be friends. He spoke of other things that night, of other times, other feelings. But this, he said, was most important. These two nations, our two nations, should not remain enemies. And with glass in hand, and speaking in Chinese, he offered this toast. I would like to propose a toast to the development of the friendship between the Chinese and American peoples, and to the better relations between China and the United States. It was an amazing evening. It was the beginning of a look at a China nobody had known before, a look at China 72, through a hole in the bamboo curtain. You look through that hole in the bamboo curtain, and what do you see? People, millions upon millions of people, 800 million people, almost 4 times the population of the United States. And this becomes China's most valuable commodity, not grain, nor steel, but people. People to work, people to dig, people to build. And the people of China go about the daily task of living much as we do. They don't have much, few cars, bicycles mostly, simple, almost identical clothes, a simple, almost identical life. And yet to them it is a good life. They are poor by our standards, but then everyone in China is poor, all 800 million. There are no wealthy people. Everything and everybody has been reduced to the lowest economic denominator. Nobody gets rich, but nobody starves either. Everyone works who can. Everyone is taken care of. It is that simple and that complex. China is, in a sense, today a frontier society, even in its biggest cities. A society in which the people practice the old-fashioned virtues of hard work and thrift and total personal honesty. They are a shy people, mostly because contacts with the outside world have been almost non-existent for the past 23 years. And if they look at you and stare, it is not because they're impolite, only because they're not accustomed to seeing strangers. Their world is changing, still changing from that cataclysmic change the revolution brought in 1949. Only one thing remains constant now amid all this change. For the first time in the 5,000 years of China's history, everybody has a piece of the action. I'm sitting in the home of Pan Shi in the August 1st People's Commune just outside of Shenyang, China, in the northeast section, used to be called Manchuria. It's a small home, it's one room. The one room serves as living room, dining room, bedroom, den, sewing room. It's a multi-purpose room. Mr. Pan told us he has lived 20 years in this house, building it himself shortly after the communists took over. He himself is a member of the Communist Party, one of the relatively few in the commune who are. But his salary is the same as other veteran farmers on the commune, $35 a month. Other workers receive less, in a descending scale, based upon work and need. And this is the way most of the people in China live today, because most of the people are like Mr. Pan and his family, farmers, living simply, close to the land. All live in communes and work for the state. And the closest thing to private enterprise today are the small patches of land where each farmer grows vegetables for his own consumption. The communes are small towns, really. This one of 20,000 people has its own school system. All the basics are taught, grammar, mathematics, history, and because it's a commune school, agriculture as well. And as always, Along with this comes a healthy curriculum of the thoughts of Mao Zedong. Physical education is a big thing in China. Daily exercise is insisted upon not only in schools like this, but throughout every level of Chinese society. And when they graduate from these schools, the children of Mr. Pan will go to work, following in their father's footsteps. On this commune, the crop is rice. And these particular young ladies are weeding and aerating the soil, all by hand. Salary, about $15 a month. Most of these people will be doing this the rest of their lives. That's the system. A few, brighter and politically adept, may leave the farm for higher education and a career, but only if their comrades in the commune, by a vote, indicate they should be given the chance. That, too, is the system. Oh, there are the stories of the poor peasant boy becoming a fine doctor, or a teacher, or a scientist. But for the most part in China, a farmer is a farmer is a farmer, and that is that. In the big cities, in the heavy industries, it's pretty much the same. You start out life as a steelworker you remain. It's a tough job, but in China, one of the highest paying at $75 a month. Most of the workers wrestling with this heavy pipe are women, and this too is the system. They do the same work as men, they get the same salary. Women's lib came to China in 1949 with the establishment of the communist regime. There was too much to be done, Mao said, for women to be staying at home raising children. So he put the children in nurseries, and he put the women to work. These steel mills with smokestacks like an ecologist's nightmare are in Manchuria, China's industrial heartland. Russia, then Japan, ruled here as conquerors for many decades. Now it is all Chinese. The old city of Mukden, capital of Japanese Manchuria, is now Shenyang, and the equivalent of our own Pittsburgh as a steelmaker. The city is like an enormous company town, and most of the mills are as modern and up-to-date as any in Pittsburgh, with automation running the huge machines and with little human help going about the task of making steel. Unlike the farm communes where families live in individual houses or huts, in the cities, industrial workers live in apartments, in apartment complexes like this one. It's the Chinese equivalent of a public housing project. Rents are cheap. A 3-bedroom apartment goes for $5 a month. Mrs. Pan G.D. and her family of 4 children, a husband and her mother, share this apartment. The rooms are small but uncluttered. They're hot in the summer, cold in the winter. There is no central heating. But the family is well off by Chinese standards. The bicycles in the bedroom are a sure tip-off. There are 3 signs of affluence in China today: a bicycle, a radio, and a sewing machine. This family has all 3. But then there are 3 salaries coming in. Both Mrs. Pan and her husband work, as does an older son. Their combined income totals about $90 a month. And there is enough left over for a savings account at the bank. Interest, a little less than 2%. The high-rise apartment is a new concept here, and there are rows and rows of the older houses behind, primarily the traditional one-room home. But there are airy yards for the children to play. This is the No. 3 hospital of the Peking Medical College, probably the leading exponent in all China of acupuncture as treatment and anesthesia. And the woman on the operating table is Mrs. Chow Yu-Chen, a 51-year-old wife and mother. And she's being prepared for surgery to remove a large tumor on her thyroid gland. The only anesthesia she will receive will be 2 acupuncture needles placed on either side of her neck. The one on her right has already been inserted. The acupuncture specialist is now preparing to place the second needle. Years ago, the needles were gently twirled by nurses, continuously twirled, to produce extended anesthesia. Now, the Chinese have found that small electrodes attached to the needles produce a minute electrical current and do the job easier and better. The tumor, as you can see, rises from the lady's neck somewhat larger than a golf ball. A team of 2 surgeons, an assistant, and several nurses will participate in the operation. But instead of the complicated machinery of the anesthesiologist found in American operating rooms, there will be only 2 needles. It takes 20 minutes, we were told, for the needles to produce complete anesthesia. And in almost exactly 20 minutes, the nurses began draping the woman's head so the operation could begin. And through it all, she was totally awake and alert, and surprisingly, not nervous at all. And then the operation began. The surgeon made a solid, steady stroke right across the apex of the tumor. But there was no sound at all from Mrs. Chow. Quite obviously, she was feeling no pain. An American physician, Dr. Freeman Carey of Washington, D.C., observed the operation and had high praise for the technique and dexterity of the surgeons. He agreed that the 2 acupuncture needles were indeed providing a complete anesthesia. He said he did not know exactly how they did, only that they did. Mrs. Chow lay still throughout the operation, chatting quietly with the nurses, awake the entire time. And then, a little more than an hour after it began, the operation was over. The surgeon had tied the last suture and had placed a large cotton bandage over the wound. The needles had been pulled from her neck, and still she felt no pain. And the story of Mrs. Chow's hospitalization is almost as amazing as her surgery. She had entered the hospital 2 days before for tests prior to the operation, and she will remain in the hospital for several days afterwards for observation and perhaps still more tests. And her total expenses for her room, for the operation, for the doctors, amounted to $2. Had she not been working, it would have cost nothing. But since she is able to pay, she will. Of course, the Chinese have their ways of keeping medical costs down. The surgeon who performed the operation gets a salary of only $75 a month. The operation did not seem to tire Mrs. Chow. On the contrary, she was full of spirit and anxious to talk about her experience.
手术前呢也没有什么，手术前就是打那针吧，扑通扑通的，一点的什么也感觉不了，就觉得这么棒。这就是那个莫姆拉脸缝完了是吧？缝的时候提针的时候就跟那个比那打针的那个疼法还轻一点呢，就觉得一抻，这拔线什么的都知道，自己都知道，也都一提，可比那打针的那疼啊还轻呢，一般的打针的还轻。哎，一般的打针的扎的那什么的还疼呢，这不疼。
She doesn't feel anything during the operation, but afterwards, when the operation is finished, when they're going to solder the insertion, she feels something like as if she receives an injection, but the pain is still less than the injection. Just something like that she feels. 现在疼不疼啊？
不疼。
No pain. No pain now.
Ask her if she feels steady on her feet.
你现在站得稳站不稳呢？
这不站得稳吗？你看这完全站得也可以吧？
Very steady.
是不是？反正你说一点感觉没有啊，这也不现实。就老玩意儿有点觉得胀，你别的感觉没有。这要疼我还说得了话吗？是不是？你让我说我也说不了啊，是不是
She says it's not realistic to say that. She says it's not realistic to say that you feel nothing at all. But anyway, she's not very painful. Otherwise, she won't be able to speak like this.
那现在回去吧。
好，谢谢。谢谢你们家的光环。
我们现在请大家再看一个阑尾炎的病人。
Well, it's hard to believe, but we were here. We watched it. The lady laid on the table. They put 2 needles in her neck. They cut her open, took out her thyroid gland, sewed her back up, and as you can see, she just walked back to her room.
An hour later, we wanted to check up on Mrs. Chow. The doctor led us to her room, where she was telling 2 other patients about the operation. She still did not feel any pain. The doctor said she would, however, when the effects of the acupuncture wore off. What would happen then, we asked. Said he, "We'll give her an aspirin." But the most dramatic use of acupuncture occurs here, at a school for the deaf in Shenyang. Here, doctors of the Red Army treat congenitally deaf children with acupuncture. Each day, every day, classes are stopped for a brief period while doctors make the rounds with their thin, sharp needles. The children, all between 7 and 12 years old, sit quietly and disciplined in their seats, holding out their arms, apparently feeling no pain, as the doctor inserts the needles and gives them that characteristic twist. But that is only a preliminary. The primary treatment is much more dramatic. Acupuncture needles placed directly adjacent to the ear canal. It is an amazing sight. This is, the Chinese admit, a relatively new concept in the use of acupuncture, but it is something they strongly believe in. They claim a cure rate of 16%. They say 16 of every 100 children so treated have their hearing restored. These young ladies are students at the Institute for Nationalities in Peking. They are from Tibet, high in the Himalayas, and are part of a student body of over 400, drawn entirely from the various minority races within China. Mongols from the north, Muslim Uyghurs from the great Northwest Desert, little-known races of people who have been a part of China for centuries. 48 minorities in all are represented here. And the Chinese admit to problems concerning their minorities. They have not received the education they should have, they say. They are backward. And the native Chinese admit to feeling superior to their minority brothers. Politically adept students are educated here and will return to their own people to help in their education and to preach the philosophy of Mao. Part of the heritage of old China was its art. Wistful, dreamlike paintings, exquisite carvings of ivory and jade, all delicate and graceful. But China's art seems to have stopped with the revolution. Today, drama and music and painting are chiefly propaganda, and the ivory and jade carvings mere copies of what has gone before. In its usually efficient fashion, the government has gathered artisans together at this handicraft factory in Peking. to produce the carvings and the cloisonné, and much of what China is noted for, to sell abroad or to foreigners at special friendship stores in China's major cities. It should be noted that the average citizen of China could not afford to buy any of these items we are seeing made. Many of these are lost arts anywhere else in the world. It may take this man a week to finish the extremely delicate work on this cloisonné vase, ladling drops at a time the colorful enamel between the elaborate brass scrollwork. But here he is not bothered by supply and demand, only by work schedules and quotas. In China, even the painting of eggs is considered a minor art. And in this factory, artists spend the day painting the same lovely scene on hundreds of eggs. Some flowers, some leaves, a bird singing. It's pretty, and we would imagine pretty monotonous to do. But then the government isn't interested in artistic fulfillment, only in painted eggs. This must be the greatest personal monument in the world today. Tiananmen Square, the square of heavenly peace in Peking. It's not as beautiful perhaps as the Taj Mahal, not as physically overpowering in the pyramids, but in its way, it's in a class by itself. It's dedicated to one man, and on a few hours' notice, fully 1 million Chinese can gather here to shout and sing the praises of that one man, Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao, whose thoughts guide and direct 1/4 of the world's population. This is Red Square, Chinese style, the political and ideological crossroads of China. The square is flanked on one side by the Museum of the Revolution, on the other by the Great Hall of the People, China's parliament. And communism's bright stars shine here also, Marx and Engels, as well as Lenin and Stalin. And in case you ever wondered how the Chinese can come up with those wonderful football card displays in the square, we've found their secret. They have simply marked off the whole area with numbered squares, thousands upon thousands of them. They assign one person to each square, the rest is easy. All of this for Chairman Mao as he stands on the gate of heavenly peace, the entrance to the imperial palace. And this is the palace, the old forbidden city, center of the empire, household of emperors for more than 500 years. It is an enormous place, over 1 mile long, more than half a mile wide, with elaborate curved roof palaces succeeding one another, each more beautiful than the last. It is surrounded by walls 30 feet high, protected by a series of moats. And they say the entire grounds are paved with brick 3 feet deep to prevent anyone from tunneling in from outside the walls. There are 9,000 rooms. Today, it is a museum, and people from all over China come to see it. It was begun in the Ming Dynasty, 88 years before Columbus discovered America. Venerable by our standards, but quite new to a culture that traces its beginnings back thousands of years. And it is explained to the people, not as a great heritage of their past, but as an example of how the ruling class once lived and oppressed the working people. Everything is explained in terms of the revolution. And the throne of the last of the Manchu emperors seems strangely, if beautifully, irrelevant, marking, as it does here, not the end of 5,000 years of history, but merely a moment of change in the class struggle. The Great Wall, one of man's most fantastic engineering masterpieces. While Rome was still a small warrior state fighting to establish itself in the Mediterranean, fully 200 years before the birth of Christ, Chinese engineers were building this wall. It snakes 1,400 miles across northern China. Placed in America, it would stretch from New Orleans to Boston and beyond. 40 feet high, 20 feet wide, it is the most enduring monument to the glory of China's past. And what of China's future? China's future is not yet 3 feet tall, and it marches off in the morning singing songs of the revolution. This is the important generation in China. Mao will be gone by the time these children grow up. They will be the first generation not to know him as a living and viable father of his country. And yet, they will be expected to carry on his revolution. Already, the training has begun. These children are attending a 6-day nursery run by the state to care for the children of workers. Their parents, father and mother, work 6 days a week, so the state cares for the children. Their parents bring them here Monday morning before going to work. They remain here until Saturday evening when the parents come to pick them up. And so they play and sing and laugh the way children should, and they become perhaps more self-reliant than most. But their ties to family are loosened, and the ancient Chinese tradition of love of family, of reverence of age, is replaced by more practical things. Duty to the state, allegiance to that awesome mass they call the people. The children of China will be taught that the people are everything. The individual is not important. We look at these children in their play and realize that they are the first generation of a new dynasty ruling China, a dynasty even more all-powerful than the Manchus or the Mings or the Tangs which have gone before. These are the children of the Mao dynasty. They are the inheritors of the revolution, and it will be they, more than anything else, who will determine how long that dynasty rules and how well. Truly, the future of China is not yet 3 feet tall, but it is growing.